Hey there, students. Good morning. Getting started just a little bit behind schedule this morning, but there is a reason for that. I've just finished a DBQ on the age of exploration. I wanted to have a brand new DBQ to give y'all here, so that just in case you want one last practice session, then you've got that. Okay, so I've got a DBQ. Let me look over that. I just put that in the YouTube YouTube description. Now, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, make sure let's go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That sounds like a great thing to do this morning. And going from there, let me just take a quick look at this, and I think we're good. I think that I've got everything I need on this. And let's see, actually, that is something that doesn't need to be there. And I just need to save this real quick, and we will be getting to questions very shortly. All right, so let's see. Let me go ahead and save that and save that. So yeah, I was just finishing this up. So it's a DBQ on the age of exploration. Now, a few things today. We've got the annual Breakfast with Ritchie broadcast, which is something that we do every year. Now, I'm going to be going from here at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We're going to have lunch with Marco. Okay, so lunch with Marco. Now that's going to be on Marco Learning's YouTube channel. So let me go ahead and just make that clear to everybody that there's going to be a lunch with broadcast. That's going to be at 1 p.m. on Marco Learning's YouTube channel. And then there is, finally, we're going to have a salon, which, I've been having salon reviews at night, but this one's going to be immediately before the exam. It's going to be co-streamed on YouTube. Okay, so there will be a YouTube feed for the final, salon review right before the exam. But the tickets have been reduced. If you're on Crowdcast and you're watching that on Crowdcast, it's going to be basically like the people have a front row seat and can ask questions. You can see the chat gets pretty crazy coming up on the exam. So for right now, just make sure that you are, you are subscribed to Marco Learning's YouTube channel. We have lunch with Marco. That's going to start at 1 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so we're going to do that on Marco Learning's channel at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So let's go ahead and get started with the Breakfast with Ritchie broadcast. And we'll be going for this, and we'll be reviewing. So now the thing is, make sure in the YouTube description, we've got a link to my brand new DBQ on the age of exploration. And I think that I'm going to work on that one. What we'll do is we will stop this broadcast at about 12 noon, somewhere around there, maybe about 12:15. Give y'all enough time to actually do that DBQ. And then with lunch with Marco, what we'll do is we will, we'll go through that DBQ together. Okay, so I've got that age of exploration DBQ, wanted to have something fresh and new for you. Okay, so as far as that goes, remember, come to crowdcast.io/Tom Ritchie if you want to ask questions. Okay, so we want to note that. And then I'm going to be looking at the YouTube chat now and then. When there's a super chat on YouTube, I will try to do something. All right, looks like we've got some great folks here. Anna Banana is here, and so is Kunal and T Doctor and all of these great folks. Okay, so we've got some great people here on YouTube. Looks like okay, so we've got let's see, Beatbox Coyote, quick shout out there. And then we've got another super chat here that I have not seen. If I don't see a super chat, I'm sorry. When I see super chats, I do read them. So the thing is, if there's a super chat, I will read it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the breakfast, shall we? Can I go over the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, according to Voltaire, right? That kind of starts what we, my friend Paul Sargent out there. Let me see if Paul wants to, let's see. Okay, let's see if Paul Sargent wants to jump on at all this morning. Okay, so with that, the Holy Roman Empire, we want to go over kind of, what we might call the collapse. The first thing we want to note is the peace of Augsburg. When you think about the peace of Augsburg during the early stages of the Reformation, remember that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, he tried to maintain religious uniformity in the Holy Roman Empire. He said that Martin Luther is an outlaw. He tried to keep the Holy Roman Empire Catholic. There were some wars that were fought over this, and finally that was solved by the peace of Augsburg, which said whoever reigns, his religion. So whatever whatever religion the local prince had, then that is going to be the religion of the people in that part of the Holy Roman Empire. It will depend on the religion of the local prince. And so that's where you start to see that the Holy Roman Empire, remember, it's really just more of a confederation. It's never, it's not an empire in the sense that you typically think of an empire. That's why Voltaire said that about it, right? And so what happens here is the Holy Roman Empire is, basically dissolved by Napoleon. That is Napoleon's conquest, and he creates the Confederation of the Rhine. And then after the fall of Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna creates the German Confederation, where they create like 39 states rather than just they create 39 states rather than 300 or so states from the Holy Roman Empire. And while we are talking about Metternich, do we want to hear the Metternich rap? Do we want to hear the Metternich rap? Y'all tell me. I don't want to do anything that y'all don't want to that y'all don't want to hear. So if that's as far as that goes, let me know. If y'all don't want to hear me do the Metternich rap, I don't want to bother y'all. So just let's keep that in mind there. Okay, so with that, let's see. I mean, if y'all don't want to hear it, y'all don't want to hear it. So let's see what they're saying in Crowdcast over here. All right, so they're telling me to rap. Okay, let's do a poll in Crowdcast. Those of y'all who are here, Metternich rap. Who wants to hear the Metternich rap? Okay, let me make sure. Remember, crowdcast.io/Tom Ritchie if you want to respond to polls and stuff like that. Okay, so we've got, so we've got, a majority. Oh, some of y'all don't want to hear it. Oh my goodness, that's like a lot of people who don't want to hear it. Okay, so going from there, but the majority of you do. About 2/3 of you want to hear it. Some of y'all don't. I don't know. Okay, so we will. We did have a vote. We will wrap. Okay. Whew. And I can't find the instrumental there, so I'm just going to freestyle this one, right? What up, Europeans? It's the ladies' pick. Austrian Prince Clemens von Metternich. Aristocracy savior, I'm the man of the hour. Gonna carefully restore Europe's balance of power. Eating nationalists for breakfast, liberals for my dinner. Gotta be conservative if you want to be a winner. I'm the coach man of Europe, so you better hold your horses because all the great powers are about to join forces. Napoleon thought he was too big for Elba, so we threw him on a boat straight to St. Helena. Threatened European peace, so we sent him adrift. Shake the French Revolution off like Taylor Swift. Come on, Talleyrand, have a seat at the table because Europe needs a France that is strong and stable. There's no need to punish France. I just want to keep order and restore the old 1791 borders. The liberals have ideas that they want to express, but I shut their mouths up when I censor the press. Stability between and within European states. It's the goal of this order that I'm trying to create. So join me in Vienna where a Congress is in session. Together we can stop the revolution from progressing. This conservative order, no, it ain't going to fall because I build coalitions like Trump builds walls. All right, that was circa 2015. Okay, so y'all heard what you want to hear. I'm so glad about that. Okay, so thank y'all for that. All right, so going from there, we've looked at the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, the basics of the revolutions of the basics of, I thought I was doing the basics of the revolutions of 1848. We can get there. Okay, the motivations of German unification. Okay, important events. All right, so what we want to understand is that German and Italian unification. Okay, so all right, so as far as that goes, German and Italian unification have some similarities. First of all, they were both, stalled in the revolution of 1840, the revolutions of 1848. We see that, in Italy and the German states, you have failed revolutions that are happening here, partly because of the concert of Europe. Okay, so what happens in Italy when there is this revolution of 1848? Mazzini and Garibaldi proclaim the Roman Republic, and then foreign powers come in, okay, especially like the French come in to help the Pope. The Pope did not support Italian unification. And so, there was one of those documents y'all saw in that revised Italian unification DDQ, where you saw that, with Italian unification, you saw this priest who said that the Pope should become the head of the state. Well, a bit of outside evidence would be that the Pope is not, supportive of Italian unification. The Pope does not want to be, part of, the head of a unified Italian state. So that happens in 1848. We see that, this falls, okay, because there's a lot of foreign intervention there. Now, in German unification, you've got the Frankfurt Parliament. Okay, thank you, Spiffy Tiffy 113, Caden Caro, and Fuqua Taylor, who have recently followed me on Instagram. Sarah and Scout Garrett N1. Thank y'all for the recent Instagram follows. And so, in the German states, they tried to make basically a constitutional monarchy. The Frankfurt Parliament gets together in 1848, and the Frankfurt Parliament tries to write a constitution. They invite the King of Prussia to become the King of Prussia to become the king of a united Germany, basically a constitutional monarch on a liberal basis. The King of Prussia's like, I don't want your pig crown. I don't want to pick up a crown out of the gutter. It's like, oh, there's a gutter over there. There's a crown in it. Do I want that? No. Okay. He did think about it for a little bit. Then he's like, no, I don't want that pig crown. Okay, so with that, we want to. Okay, so let me make a little note here. And so with that, says I don't want your pig crown. And so that revolution is put down. And so what happens here is that you see that they have tried to unite under the basis of liberalism and liberal nationalism, and that failed. And so now one thing that we need to note when we're thinking about Italian and German unification, we need to understand how the Crimean War, put an end to the concert system. Okay, remember in 1815, the Congress of Vienna begins the concert system with all of these great powers in Europe working together. Okay, so they're working in concert together for, remember, stability within states to stop revolutions, stability between states, which is making sure that that the states are at war with each other. And the guiding principle here being the balance of power. All right, Ray of Sunshine over at Mercy in Long Island. Okay, glad to see that Mercy's here and Miss Reyes students are here. So the Crimean War, where Russia decides that they're going to take advantage of the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe. Russia sees an opportunity to move in and to expand its territory. And Britain and France are like, they're not going to allow that to happen. And so they start fighting against Russia in the 1850s in the Crimean War. They are basically fighting over the balance of power, that Russia is now seen as a threat. And the Crimean War results in the modernization of a lot of militaries. For example, the British stopped selling military commissions as a result of the Crimean War. So you see a lot of modernization because the British had a bunch of idiots commanding. Like the Charge of the Light Brigade is a beautiful poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, but it is a poem about a disaster. Okay, basically a cavalry charge at a fortified position, and this idiot was just some aristocrat who bought his commission. But we also want to understand that the Crimean War kind of puts an end to this concert system, which had really, war was frowned upon in Europe. For any reason, really. Now, of course, there's not going to be a proper continental war again until World War what? Okay, sorry, the World Wars never happened, right? So as far as that goes, that what we're seeing here is that, although there's not going to be a continental war, Bismarck decides, this is something where, do I want to wrap so early? Do I want to wrap so early again in here? I don't know. I feel like I just wrapped. So Otherwise I might do the German unification rap, but I feel, or the Bismarck rap, but I feel like I just rapped. Y'all are probably tired of that. And besides, I'm not a rapper. Yeah, World War what? Okay, so we see here. Okay, so let's see here. Do y'all want to hear? Okay, because I definitely don't want. Okay, rap later. Okay, so we'll do the rap. We'll do the Bismarck rap later. Let's see. But of course, see, the thing is, what y'all got to understand is a lot of these raps, they actually stick with you because they rhyme. Okay. There was actually a graduate student who was studying diplomacy in Vienna, and he messaged me one time and he said that it was my Metternich rap that was going through his head during the test. Because when you have music, it's something that is, it's something that sticks with you. Okay. So as far as that goes, oh, did somebody say, what is it? You don't review now. Okay. Y'all are saying we can rap later. Okay. So people don't, I haven't remembered a single one. All right. So as far as that goes, we'll put that in later. And so Bismarck is basically, unifying Germany on the basis of warfare, on the basis of blood and iron. And actually, you know what? I think I might have to overrule y'all here, because I think that it's going to actually be helpful. The voice of an angel. It sounds like somebody's seen Step Brothers. All right, Otto von Bismarck, German unification, ladies and gentlemen. This will help me explain this to y'all, okay? This goes into things. Now remember, just look up my SoundCloud. You'll be able to find this. I'm the Iron Chancellor, and I feel an obligation. Unify the German states under Prussian domination. A conservative at heart, but I've got a little trick. It's the politics of power. Call it real politics. An alliance with the liberals because I'm industry emphatic and they're secular. They like my culture cop against the Catholics and the social democrats because I'm gonna put it bluntly that Germany will never be a socialist country. I've got old age pensions and some accident insurance. If you're hurt at work, I've got your back. You've got my reassurance. Call it state socialism. Now the liberals want to hate. But without the working classes, we can't unify the state. The position of Prussia in Germany at this hour will not be determined by its liberalism, but its power. Great questions aren't decided by speeches or majorities. It's blood and iron. I'll use war to spread authority. With the Austrians, we took Schleswig and Holstein, then declared war on Austria. The next step in my grand design. Prussia won in 7 weeks. Austria wasn't any match. Then it's time to provoke France with the M's dispatch. Moltke led a modern army armed with telegraphs and trains. France decisively defeated, gave up Alsace and Lorraine. After unifying Germany, then I really had some clout. Now it's 1890 and I'm out. So here's the thing, these things are actually helpful. Okay. So as far as that goes, understand that I made it go into meter and rhyme, but it's still almost verbatim his blood and iron speech. If you wrote this on a DBQ, your reader might not even be able to tell. The position of Prussia in Germany at this hour will not be determined by its liberalism, but its power. Great questions aren't decided by speeches and majorities. It's blood and iron. I'll use war to spread authority. Now, here's the thing, that when you're looking at what Bismarck is saying, he's saying that we're not going to unite Germany by a Frankfurt Parliament, by a constitutional monarchy or something like that, okay? That we are going to unite Germany based on power. And that is the whole thing about Bismarck's concept of realpolitik, that we're rejecting ideology, okay? So when we're thinking about when we're thinking about this, yeah, I was acting as an enlightened absolutist, overruling the people who were against me rapping right now. So the thing is that Bismarck is, remember, Metternich wanted to avoid war. We avoid war. We avoid threats to the balance of power. Understand that the unification of Germany creates the biggest threat to the balance of power that Europe had seen since Napoleon. And so Bismarck doesn't care. Bismarck is not worried about the balance of power. Bismarck is worried about, making Germany united under Prussian dominance. He's not looking to have some kind of equal united Germany. He wants to do it without Austria, and that's why he fights the wars of unification, the Schleswig Wars, the Austro-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War. And excuse me, the Franco-Prussian War is basically just a ploy to get everybody on the same page. That once the South German states, the Catholic South German states, are brought into a united Germany, they're not so happy. And then it's like Bismarck provokes France with this M's dispatch and gets France to declare war on Germany. And so Germany goes to war, they win, and then they proclaim the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors. And so what we want to understand here is that Bismarck, even though he's a conservative, he's using power. Okay, so he's saying we're not going to use the same kind of thing that they try to use in 1848. This is going to be about using Prussia's modern industrialized military state to conquer. So the basics of the revolutions of 1848. Yeah, in Mr. Carpenter's class, thank y'all very much for your support. I'm very, very thankful. Yeah, y'all feel free when those of you that are getting upvoted, put your teacher's name in there, put your class in there. I'll be glad to shout out. So the revolutions of 1848, and we're talking about the basics. Now, I've got a 5-part video on the revolutions of 1848, and the first video is, going into basically the brass tacks. Okay, but let me go ahead and pull up something here. Okay, the revolutions of 1848. So let me go ahead and pull that up and show it to you. So it's better, I think, if you can see it on screen. Mr. Fridland's class. Thank y'all for supporting my work. Thank y'all for being here. Okay, so as far as that goes, yeah, Kulturkampf is German for culture war. Okay, and what Bismarck was trying to do, and the liberals were very into this, Bismarck is trying to limit the influence of Catholic parties in the government. Thank you, Grace Jenkins, Nico W14, Luca Jean, to Team 10, and Kiera Darnell for your recent follows, and to Team 10 for the recent like spree. All right, so with that, thank y'all so much. And then let's see. So the revolutions of 1848, what we see here are revolutions that happen in France, which France is pretty much an internal revolution. Now, that is on one hand successful, but on the other hand, not so successful, because remember, Louis Napoleon proclaims himself emperor not too long after that. And so then we see here that, in the German states, you've got a lot of uprisings here that are happening, but those are eventually put down. Now, the Austrians are struggling. But what happens here, notice that the Russians don't have a revolution of 1848. The British don't really have a revolution because they were open to reform. So the British government, to an extent, at least enough, listened to the concerns of working class people and passed enough reform so that they were able to, forego a revolution. But then the Russians, you look at the Decembrist revolt and how decisively that was put down. Also, we want to note that Russia had not attained the same level of industrialization or urbanization. But when we see the Hungarian Revolution, this attempted Hungarian Revolution, you see that the Russians come in and they send an army to help the Austrians. So we see the concert system at work here. We see the French coming in in the revolutions of 1848, the Austrians. So we see that, Italian unification for a long time was hindered by foreign interference. Okay, now what happens here is that Cavour, that's where Cavour comes in, building strategic alliances and trying to keep foreign powers, out of it. So that's what happens in terms of Cavour's realpolitik. Remember that Italy ends up being united not as a republic, but as a monarchy. And so with that, we see that that's going on there. And then we want to note just some general observations that several European nations were swept by a series of simultaneous revolutions. So especially in France, Italy, and the German states. Okay, and then these revolutions generally failed and conservatives regained power. And then Britain and Russia did not experience the revolutions that otherwise swept over the continent. And basically, this is part of, kind of the end, it's one of the things that marks the end of the age of Metternich. And so we see here that we've got several groups here where you've got the liberals, the nationalists, and then the radicals, Democrats and socialists. Remember that liberals in the 19th century did not necessarily approve of universal male suffrage because that was seen as something that could undermine property rights if the working classes were able to vote. So liberals were definitely mixed on that. Now, when you see that this coalition included liberals, nationalists, socialists, Democrats, these people really, like a 19th century liberal and a 19th century socialist, really had nothing in common. And so this coalition was so shaky that a united front by conservatives was able to break it up. And so that's the basics. Of course, we've got the exam in a few hours, so the basics are what we're mostly concerned about, that we want to focus on. And so with that, let's go ahead and see what other questions are out there. Now another thing is I'm curious, which platforms. I want to see. It seems like people use Twitter less than they used to. Instagram, Twitter, okay, and Snapchat. Now, Snapchat is Tom Ritchie SC. Everything else is at Tom Ritchie. I probably use Snapchat the least as far as posting on stories and stuff like that. But just kind of wondering, or actually, you know what? This is which platform do you use most? Okay, so because I've got a choice of 3 there. Okay, so we see here when we think about which one you use most. Okay, so people are on Instagram a lot more. I will take a few questions from Twitter. Okay, so if people are following me on Twitter, they can ask questions and I'll see them. So I will sometime during this broadcast, I'm going to do Instagram shout outs, but I will take a few questions from Twitter if anybody's got it. All right. So as far as that goes, Iran's asking me as far as how I'm doing. I'm doing great. Having a great breakfast. Twitter's also a great place for y'all to share some memes and stuff like that. So with that, so we're going to note here that let's see. Okay, so we'll see that, and so going with that, I'm just going to look into here. And thank you, Chad Heller, for buying Romulus Euro. That's great. And so as far as that goes, I'm going to be doing a few Twitter questions. Okay, what are my predictions about the exam topic? I'm glad that somebody asked me this. Okay, this is a question from the Wall and Lamp on Twitter. Okay, so the Wall and Lamp on Twitter is asking that, do I have any predictions about the topic? Now, here's the thing that we want to know. Y'all are the guinea pigs. You are taking the first. AP history exam. I want to go ahead and tell y'all we've been talking about a DBQ topic. Then what we want to understand here is, we've got a, it may not be just one topic. The AP government students on Monday, it was a variety of prompts. So we may not be looking at the DBQ topic. So that's one thing that y'all need to know. Now, of course, y'all aren't going to be collaborating with anybody. That's something that you definitely don't need to do. Now, I will tell y'all, I think I'm going to share a meme just because, I think this meme's probably a little bit, let's see, what do I call this? Maybe a little bit, what did I call this last night? Possibly a little too edgy, but I'm going to say here, don't be like Baby Yoda. Okay, so what I'm going to say here is don't be like Baby Yoda. Take your own AP exam. Okay, so take your own AP exam. Okay. Take your own AP exam. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just put that there. I think y'all will like this meme. Okay, so and then we'll get back to reviewing, I swear. So with that, we're going to put that there. Let's see, Andalore. All right. So we're going to go ahead and put that there. And so that meme is there on Instagram if y'all want to check it out. All right. So, but note that it could be a variety of topics. Okay. So we could have several DBQ topics. It may not be something in terms of just one topic. Okay. So what would I recommend you do an hour before the test? Okay. So it's really what's most beneficial now. it depends on what you want to do. I do have an Age of Exploration DBQ. What I'm planning on doing is taking a little break at noon, noon Eastern, so or 12:15 or something like that. What I'm thinking is to take this broadcast at 12:15. In the YouTube description, you should have have access to my Age of Exploration DBQ. Okay, so my Age of Exploration DBQ is something that I might recommend that you do in that 45 minutes between breakfast with Richie and lunch with Marco. And then at lunch with Marco, I'll go over that DBQ. Okay, so we'll go over that DBQ before we have lunch with Marco, or during lunch with Marco. And then I will be doing, kind of a freemium stream right before the exam. So it just depends. It's really up to you. My Romulus app could be something if you just want to quiz yourself on content. Romulus Euro is available at the App Store and at Google Play. If you want to do a little quiz to see content, if you think your content's good and you need to write. This is a question that I can't really answer for anyone individually. Okay, so that is the thing here is I can't really answer this question for an individual, but you can decide. Now, I think we've got content review, DBQ practice, relax, okay? And so I think possibly a combination of the three. I think you definitely don't need to be fully engaged between now and 4 o'clock. You need to spend some time relaxing, and I think that that is very important. I think that between now and 4 o'clock, you need to watch a few funny YouTube videos, okay? That's something that you want to get into. Now, one thing that I want to go into now, is speaking of funny YouTube videos. Most of y'all probably have not seen this. This was like a 2014 viral YouTube video that I thought was, it had inspired me to come up with something about POV plus, what I call POV plus. So let's go into this when we think about how to do POV plus, which I'm thinking, when I say this, some of y'all call it HIP, context, POV, context, audience, and purpose. Okay, so when we're thinking about that POV, context, audience, and purpose. Okay, so going with that, Dean Kokor getting shouted out here. Okay, so we've got there, and thank y'all so much, Dana Singe and Carolina Tortorelli. Thank y'all so much for the follow. So let's go ahead, and we are going. I thought my screen was sharing. Okay, so my screen is sharing now. All right, let's see. There we go. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about, now you can Google this and you can have this guide. This is a guide that is publicly available. If you Google POV, hold it down. Okay. Now, this is an example, just something that could make you laugh, and it also can teach you POV. This video was, I don't know, some of y'all see it. Some of y'all might, this is the one, they even have the auto-tune version, which I would highly recommend, where she's like, Mama, I love you. Mama, I love you. POP, hold it down. And so it's like this auto tune. Y'all remember when do they still do that on YouTube? That used to be a thing all the time, And so when you're looking at this, this thing was, she says POP, hold it down. Now they're accusing her of driving a getaway car. And she says, I cannot see, I'm legally blind. And they ask her, can you see at all? And she's like, I can see. Barely. And so what she's saying is basically, how am I going to drive a getaway car if I can't see? I'm legally blind. And the thing is, you look at the POV and the purpose of what she's saying here. She's trying to deny that she drove a getaway car. And so she's saying, I'm legally blind. But then again, she can kind of see, but how am I going to drive a car? I'm legally blind. And then there's another guy at some point in some of these videos where he's about to get in the car. The press is asking a question. He's like, I did it. I'm guilty. Now, here's the thing. If somebody would enter a guilty plea, like if they would say, I'm guilty, we can probably believe them most of the time. But hear me out. Isn't there a possible scenario where, you could see that somebody is saying that they're guilty? Let's think about this. Why would somebody lie and say that they're guilty? Could he be covering for someone? And see, so when we think about POV plus, point of view, context, audience, and purpose, what we're thinking about here is, how it is that a person's situation. Now, it's not just identifying the demographics, but basically occupation, educational background, all of this demographic information. Now, note, gender POVs, just because a woman wrote the document, doesn't mean a gender POV will necessarily be relevant, but it probably should be at least considered. And so when you think about this, so let's think about my occupation. What if I were to tell you that AP European history is the most important class that you will ever take in it's the most important class you will ever take in your high school career. And so if I were to tell you that, then what happens here is you're thinking, you know what, that could probably be something that I'm just saying that because it helps me. It goes along with what Nietzsche called the will to power. Okay. Nietzsche said people will naturally say things that will help them advance in life or gain something. So when you're looking at a document, what perspectives does this person have? What purpose do they have? What are they going to gain from it? Okay, there was that meme a while back, remember, where somebody would say something, it's like a text message, and it's like, I'm going to tell somebody this, and then it's like, what are you going to gain from it? Anybody remember that meme? I thought that was a good one. So with that, you know, when you're looking at this, when you're thinking about the point of view, where's this person coming from? Now, just attributing and saying, well, he's a teacher, that's his point of view. No, you need to say he's a Euro teacher, and therefore he would benefit from people taking AP Euro. So he may not really believe that, that it's the best, or you say that his purpose in saying, Tom Ritchie's purpose in saying that AP European history is the most important class you will ever take in high school, that his purpose is to get more people to take AP Euro and to get more ad revenue on his YouTube videos. Just like when I say that the Romulus Euro app, would be a great $1.99 investment. The thing is, that's my app. I will benefit financially, actually a small extent. You know, there's not really a lot of money in selling apps. You know, Apple takes like a third, and then your partners take most of what's left. Then you've got to invest in redeveloping and all this kind of stuff. There's not a whole ton of money in apps, to tell you the truth. But as far as that goes, yeah, well, I'm not making anywhere near what you're paying on that app. So the thing is that when you think about it, he's selling an app. It's his app. Of course, he's going to promote it. Okay. Now, if you went to a website that said, where you read independently that, quizzing yourself, doing quiz games actually builds connections in your brain, then that's something that may be more reliable than if I said it. And so now the other thing here, let's think about, what if the AP bio teacher said that AP European history was the most important course that I took in high school. I've become, that has made me better at Jeopardy than any other course. Or Ken Jennings or somebody like that. Let's say that Ken Jennings, who was like the champion at Jeopardy, let's say that he said, yeah, the one thing that helped me the most was AP European history. That is something that has a lot of credibility. And so when we think about point of view, we're also thinking about the historical situation, or what we might call small c context. Sorry about my mouse. It's been a problem. I'm going to replace it, I swear, but not this morning. The historical situation, what's going on in the background. So that's what, if you've got a lot of content knowledge, that's going to be the best thing to bring in. If if you're looking at Napoleon's Concordat, for example, and you're looking at that and you think, okay, that actually, I know some stuff that's going on around that. It doesn't say in the document that this granted religious toleration to non-Catholics, but I know that it did. And so you can contextualize not the essay as a whole, but you're contextualizing that document and giving it additional meaning. The audience, what audience is someone performing for? Or are they writing for just themselves in a diary? And purpose, I find that purpose analysis tends to be the easiest one for people who don't have a lot of content knowledge. So if you are in, if you're in a situation where you don't, where you're thinking like, look, I got a really bad topic. Okay. So when you're thinking about this, some people can say, so if we're not familiar with a topic, what's my advice? Shout out to Mr. Flores. Thank you so much, Mr. Flores' class. So with that, if there's a topic that you're not strong in, what you need to do is, there are 6 points on the rubric that are, that are not necessarily dependent on you knowing stuff about the content. Okay, so if we go to my AP Euro DBQ page, you can just Google AP Euro DBQ page, take a look at my new video if you haven't already. And so when we get here, the AP Euro DBQ, okay, so going into this, the AP Euro DBQ. Now, I've got the rubric, and I've also got a link to Marco Learning's setup guide and introduction here. And what we see here are different strategies. Okay, so the 6-point, the 8-point, the 10-point strategy. We don't know what's going to be a 3, a 4, or 5, but I could say that a 6 is going to be a safe 3, an 8 is going to be a safe 4. Those are my guesses. A 5 is going to be probably passing. Okay, a 7's probably going to be a 4, but I'm saying 6 and 8 would be a safe 3, a safe 4. I don't think you're going to need 10 points to get a 5. That's why I tell people complex understanding, that's a point that you really shouldn't necessarily be trying to earn intentionally. You should be trying to do these things while writing the best essay that you can. Remember, complex understanding, there are several ways to get the point, and generally a reader awards it for an essay that was overall brilliant. Okay, and so the thing is that complex understanding, if you don't have experience with this, I would say that don't try it now. Like, don't try unless you have already scored 10 points multiple times under timed conditions, or if you have extra time accommodations. If you have extra time accommodations, that changes everything. You've got time to do everything. But if you have not produced multiple 10-point essays under timed conditions, then today I would say that you want to look at the 6-point strategy or the 8-point strategy, which the 8-point strategy builds onto the 6-point strategy. Thesis, describe 2 documents. Now, I would recommend 3. My standard format for getting 6 or 8 points here is to use 3 documents and use them well. Okay, use them well. So don't just, don't be sloppy. 3 documents allows a student who's going to try to make a 3 or even a 4 to be able to not be sloppy on the DBQ. Now, if you have gotten 10 points under time conditions multiple times, then feel free to go for all 10 points. But if you don't fit into that category, this is generally my recommendation. And so generally I say here that contextualization, save that for last. Like, basically write your thesis, do your body paragraphs, then go back up and write your contextualization. If you end up running out of time, you just lost 1 point. If you did all of these, then you got 7 points. Okay. Now, here's the thing. If you don't know anything about the topic, which I hope you don't get into that situation, still, you can have a thesis statement. I would try to use all of the documents because you're not going to be really relying on outside evidence. And so you would be basically giving up some of these points here: outside evidence 1, 2, contextualization, complex understanding. Now, remember, you can be creative with outside evidence. If you don't have anything immediate to offer, think about the closest thing you have and put that out there. Okay, you may know more than you think. Don't panic. Breathe a little bit. Okay, you may know more than you think. Okay, don't panic. Make sure that you breathe a little bit. Okay, that's something that I think is going to be is going to be important. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see, Miss O'Donnell's class from Narden, great. Okay, so with that, we're going to note that. So just make sure that my standard advice is to do contextualization after you've done everything else. Okay, so with that, these are some strategies. Now, here's an annotation guide, which you could either annotate the documents on a, you can print this and use it, or you can make something similar in Word or Google Docs as you're going through, depending on your position. Now, the other thing about only using 3 documents, striking the 2 that you find most confusing. Most of you, you're not going to understand all 5 of the documents. A lot of you are going to find 2 of them confusing or not useful. Then go ahead and strike them, and then focus on the 3 that you are going to develop and do well. Now, then we've got a pre-writing setup here that basically, here's your claim in body paragraph 1. There's your evidence from the documents. Which one are you going to do your POV plus? Make sure you plan that in advance, or otherwise you'll forget. And then what is your outside evidence to support your argument? Okay, so these are things, body paragraph 2, the claim there. So, these are some things that I think will be useful for you. But if you don't have strong outside evidence to offer, because the thing is, a lot of you think, oh, I'll just Google it. That's not going to be as easy as you think. But generally, I think that you are going to be able to conjure up some outside evidence. I don't think that the topics are going to be accessible. Now, there have been some DBQs that have been released that have not been on accessible topics, but that's because they were written before the redesign in 2016. I think you're going to find these topics to be a little bit more broad and a little bit more general than usual. Now, it'll focus on a topic, but it'll give you some wiggle room. Okay, so these are some things that I think are going to all right. So wow, Shivam, there you go. Let's whoa. All right. So as far as that goes, let's get into this. Okay. So going with that, let's now go back to our POV plus. Okay. So if we're going into the POV plus, we're going to we're going to get back into basically how that works. Okay. So going back into our POV plus. All right. All right. Yeah, Crowdcast, press F to pay respects. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and all right. So we're going to go ahead and look back at our document here. And then we're going to take a look here. I've got some examples here. Okay, you can look at the tone. There are special cases here. Okay, so when we see like a foreign observer, retrospective, eyewitness, or an anonymous document. If it's anonymous, why was it anonymous? That's something that you want to think about there. And then audience considerations. Now, I find that audience is typically going to be a little tougher for some people, but there are some kind of canned cases. So if there's a diary or journal, then what we're going to see here in a diary or journal is they're not performing for an audience. A private letter to a friend, they're probably expressing themselves honestly. Posthumously published. Copernicus, when we think about Copernicus on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, then that's posthumously published because he didn't want to be burned at the stake as a heretic. So those are some things to think about. Remember that just simple attribution is not point of view. If somebody is a teacher, for example, how does that affect things? Okay, how does that affect things? So don't tell somebody that they are biased. I would try not to use the word biased because it stops you from explaining things. So when a student uses the word biased, they tend to not explain their perspective. And so you want to make sure that you are explaining, the credibility of the source. Every source is biased. Everyone is biased. So as far as that goes, be sure that if you're doing, like, for example, a gender POV, don't just say, of course she'd say that because she's a woman. Make sure that you explain that. And also remember that POV is not a substitute for describing the document's content, that you need to do that after you describe the document's content. So from there, if you look there at my AP Euro DBQ page, I've got some sample responses for my DBQ on secularism in the Renaissance, where I've got a 6-point sample, a 7-point sample, a 5-point sample, and a 10-point sample. Okay, so if we're looking at how to apply this, okay, so I've got a full credit sample here at the bottom. If we're looking at how to apply this, we see here that when we look here, we're going to see here outside. Okay, so historical context for document 1. So we see here that document 1 was Petrarch. It was a poem that he wrote to the Virgin Mary. So early Renaissance humanists tended to exhibit loyalty to the Christian tradition while also valuing classical influences. Okay, so this can be seen in Petrarch's poem glorifying the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. Okay, so that's in document 1. As the father of humanism, Petrarch was one of the, so that is basically, I'm making a specific reference, okay, glorified in the Virgin Mary. And then I say here, as the father of humanism, Petrarch was one of the first to show interest in preserving classical texts. So to see his religious devotion is evidence that the first humanists were strong Christians. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding some kind of POV historical context to document 1. So you see here, topic sentence, then I'm making a reference to the document, a clear and specific reference. Remember, earn the right to cite, okay? Make sure that you earn the right to cite. That's something that you want to make sure that, when you see document 1, make sure a reference, a clear reference was made to document 1. And when a clear reference is made, let's say that I forgot my parentheses or I, accidentally put document 2. If there's a clear reference, the reader's going to pick it up. And then typically, now sometimes historical context might be offered before the document, but make sure that you've got this very neat and clean here. And so what you see is I recommend doing this once per paragraph. Do it once in each paragraph. And so when we look at More's intent on utopia, so we see here as the Renaissance continued, more secularism could be seen in political writings and art. In Utopia, Sir Thomas More wrote about a fictional society where people were allowed to believe in any religion they wanted, and the only crime was to be intolerant, as was shown by a man who was exiled for condemning people to hell. A very specific reference to the document, no quotes. I'm showing that I understand the document's content. Since Thomas More intended for Utopia to be an ideal society, he wanted to see a society where the church did not have much control over people's lives as it did under the Renaissance. So I'm using More here to talk about the development of secularism, and then I go into the intent of his writing Utopia. So this, now note, you don't have to do historical context, audience, purpose, POV. You don't have to do all four, but sometimes it'll overlap a little bit. So basically, Thomas More intended for Utopia to be an ideal society. So going into a bit of historical context, maybe a bit of point of view, it's all kind of put in there. Okay, so we see here his purpose, and we're saying here we're going for something there. Think about what you're primarily going for, but understand that you may not be doing only context, audience, or purpose, or POV. So those are some things that are available to you there. And so on these, oh, excellent. Okay, I'm going to see if we can get Miss Kinder's class has been very, has been very supportive of me this year. Let me see, Miss Kinder, if you can say something in the chat so I can invite you on screen. Okay, so Miss Kinder's got some advice for people who are taking the test today. Just some things to get ready for the test. Let's see if we can hear from Miss Kinder, so that in the chat, so that I can invite her on screen. Okay, so as far as that goes, we're going to bring her in to talk about some test prep strategy in just a little bit here, as soon as I can see her on the chat here. Okay, so Miss Kinder is here, so we are going to invite Miss Kinder on screen. And again, thank you Kinder's kiddos for for your support this year. Kinder's kiddos, y'all have been great. All right, so let's note here. Okay. Let's see, we're waiting on her to join us. She'll be joining us in just a second. Let me do a few things here. Thank you, Fiduci. And let's see, we've got Fiduci, Shreya. Yeah, I'm not going to read that. M and Kirsten and Sydney and Amelia for the Twitter follows. Olivia and Francis, Anna Wolf. All right, Katya. All right, still waiting on Miss Kinder. We'll see when she gets here. I'm going to do a quick shout out to let's see, Mr. Healy's class I saw there, which I think we've already kind of gone through. We've already covered Italian unification. So Mr. Healy's class, shout out to y'all. All right, so with that, what am I having for breakfast today? Just tea right now. Okay, so just tea. Y'all can have some things that, yeah, very, very funny. All right, the significance of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. Now, Peter the Great was an absolutist. Okay, so yes, Shreya, okay, Shreya bought my app, and if she fails the test, she's given it a bad review. That is funny. Over in Vermont, California, in the Bay Area. All right, so as far as that goes, thank y'all so much for engaging on Twitter. And so with that, Peter the Great, of course, is a Russian absolute monarch, and he is the two W's. When we think about Peter the Great, westernization and warm water ports. Okay, westernization and warm water ports. These are going to be his main things. When it comes to westernization, Peter the Great is westernizing Russia in terms of its fashion, in terms of its dress. When he builds St. Petersburg, its own city, starts from scratch, and he doesn't use the Russian the Russian architecture. Okay, he doesn't use like the traditional Russian, like Byzantine inspired architecture. He builds the Peterhof in Baroque architecture. So we see that when he's building St. Petersburg, it's along European lines. He is modernizing his army on the Prussian model, bringing in Western European generals. Okay, so modernizing his army on the Prussian model. And so that's Peter the Great. The Russian Revolution will not be on the exam. And so remember the wars that Peter fought. These wars were to procure warm water ports, the Azov campaign, which was which was something that he's doing in order to get a port on the Black Sea. And then, his Great Northern War to get a port on the Baltic Sea. Okay. And so with that, yeah, so it doesn't, I don't know if Miss Kinder's going to be able to connect or not, but we will try again from there. Maybe she can try from another device. Now, Catherine the Great, what we want to note here is Catherine the Great was an enlightened absolutist. Now, remember, enlightened absolutism is an argumentative question. Is it possible, or is it desirable even, for the Enlightenment to be passed on through absolutism? Is absolute rule going to be the best, the best formula here? Or when you look at the British model that we see, the British model and Montesquieu, who are saying that we need a government that has like some type of some type of representation of the people, some type of popular representation. And so when we're looking at Catherine the Great, how much of an enlightened absolutist? Remember, enlightened absolutists were in the trap. Toleration of religious minorities. Okay. Then from there, so toleration of religious minorities. Then we see reform of institutions. So you think about Frederick the Great when he reformed the civil service, when Joseph II, reformed, basically, abolished serfdom and began abolishing some other institutions. We've got his Edict of Toleration for the Jews. So these are some things that are being reformed. And then we've got absolutism, of course, and then patronage of the philosophes. Where Catherine the Great, I would say that Catherine the Great was among the least successful in reforming institutions. She owed a lot to the nobility because basically she conspired with them to assassinate her husband, right? And so as far as that goes, that Pugachev's rebellion, when we think about Pugachev's rebellion, this is something where when it came time for rebellion, we see that the enlightened absolutists don't tend to be so enlightened anymore when their absolute rule is questioned. That the Pugachev rebellion was put down very violently, and Pugachev was put into a cage, paraded around, and tortured and killed in a public execution. That doesn't seem very enlightenment. So, enlightenment. So when we think about this, enlightenment, absolutism, this is something that, were they more enlightened? Were they more absolutist? That is an argumentative question. And what you have to do is you have to think about, was Catherine the Great more like Louis XIV, or was she more like Voltaire? And Catherine the Great, remember, was maybe the most successful in patronizing the philosophes, in basically, supporting Voltaire and Diderot and corresponding with them extensively. She even heard that Diderot was having financial trouble, and then she bought his library. And so with that, Mr. Carpenter's class, thank y'all so much. Best of luck to y'all today. All right. So as far as that goes, then we look here at conservatism, liberalism, nationalism, socialism. Mr. Rieger's AP Euro class. So Pranav. Now remember that going from the old the French Revolution and Napoleon, you have this nationalist and liberal revolution that is undermining the traditional legitimate monarchs and aristocracy of Europe. And so conservatism in the early 19th century, this is something to try to preserve. Okay, so this is something to try to preserve the traditional aristocracy. And so basically, when you think about the old regime, the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, everyone else, conservatives tended to favor state religion. They tended to favor traditional religion, and they also favor a place for the nobility and traditional social hierarchy. Liberalism is about the individual. Okay, so when we look at liberalism, that is about the individualism. And Charlie Zacks, thanks for the super chat, but gosh, be a little more optimistic. So with that, liberalism is based on the individual, and having individual freedoms, a laissez-faire economy. Think of a combination of John Locke and Adam Smith. All right, and Miss Kinder from sunny California, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, doing well. You want to say hey to your kiddos?
Hi, kids. I hope they're here. They might be sleeping still.
Okay, yeah. So you were up early. You had
Yeah.
trouble sleeping last night, you said?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, Miss Kinder, glad to have you over here, and I'm going to put you on the big screen here
Oh,
and let you take over for a little bit to go over
okay.
some strategies to kind of keep sane and still prepare for this test that is now less than 5 hours away.
I know. Okay, so hi, you guys. Thanks for having me to listen for a second. I think the main thing to focus on going into your exam in just a couple of hours is that you've already learned the scope of the content. And so in terms of content, there's not a ton that you can do to like cram into your mind at this point. The biggest thing that I'm telling my students is to have a plan going into the exam. So anticipate things that you'll run into, problems that you'll run into that you can then be ready to address. At least for me, when I was a student, I was a very high anxiety test taker. And that actually prevented me in a lot of situations from being as successful as I could have been. So one thing we talk about a lot in my class, which is a little, I guess, hippy dippy, is like managing test anxiety. And so I think having a plan as far as like the 6, 8, 10 document plan is really important. I know for my students, they're 10th graders. And so a lot of them are in the mindset of like, how do we get 100%? And that's really not what you need to do at this point, right? That's not what you need to do to pass. And so having a realistic plan to fall back on, I think is a real benefit. Having your resources that you're going to have in front of you organized. I don't think you should have too many things out because it'll get a little bit crazy. But whatever you're going to have to support you while you're test taking, make sure it's organized. I think anticipating that you won't understand some of the documents, or hopefully not a lot of them, but a couple of them is a good thing, because when you start to read the documents, you don't want to get into a situation where you're like having an emotional meltdown because you don't understand the very first document. Kind of rambling off all of these things. I think, trying to think of some other advice that I'm giving. To mention is we want to remember why the College Board chose a DBQ in the first place. I actually, even though DBQs are a little bit scary to AP students, I actually think it's to the benefit of you guys, because whether you think you have a lot of content knowledge or whether you don't feel as comfortable there, you still can be equally successful. So the actual skill that they're testing is your ability to read the documents and organize them into a historical argument. And so that should kind of release you from a lot of pressure of like, oh my gosh, I don't know this specific detail about this specific time period, because you should have kind of a broader scope of knowledge that you can draw from. I'm trying to read these over here. Yeah, make sure you restate your thesis. I don't know.
Okay, Miss
You're
Kinder,
welcome.
I think you gave me just enough time to make a little bit more tea here. So thank you very much for that. And one thing, like when you were saying that, oh, did she leave? Okay, I thought she was going to hang around for a little while. But thank you. And if there are other teachers that, I mean, there are some of you teachers are able to get hold of me, text message, remind, something like that. If you want to give me a little break, feel free. Kind of like a filibuster in the U.S. Senate. Those of you who take AP are going to take AP government later. And so when she's talking about restating the thesis, let's go over why you would restate the thesis. Now, first of all, I've got some Shang tea, tangerine blossom red tea, shangtea.com. That's not a sponsorship. It's just my favorite tea. He goes back to China like twice a year to inspect his own harvest and brings it back. Good stuff. Shangtea.com. It's like Shang tea, but Shang tea. That's the name. So it's his tea, which it's wonderful. And so the thing is, the reason why we restate our thesis. Now, don't copy and paste your thesis from the introduction. Make sure that you restate it in your own words. It's an insurance policy. Because the thesis is so important, some students have an easier time telling the reader what they just said. than what they're about to say. Now, I think if you pre-write effectively, you should know what you're going to say before you say it, but you restate the thesis at the end. Now, remember, there is nothing there's no way you're going to benefit from a conclusion, okay? So there's no way you're going to benefit from writing a proper conclusion, but you do want to restate your thesis, okay? So so as far as that goes, getting into, let's see. All right. So somebody told me to check Twitter. I don't see anything lately. But Louis the 14th's wars. Okay. So Olivia on Twitter, could I explain Louis the 14th's wars? And a shout out to Mr. Lavino. Okay. So when we're thinking about Louis the 14th's wars, first of all, we want to understand his Dutch War. Okay. Louis the 14th's Dutch War, which the Dutch Republic, was this republic, this hodgepodge, federal republic that they had. That the Dutch became the preeminent trading power in Europe during the 17th century, the 1600s. And so Louis the 14th is pretty jealous. Okay, he's pretty jealous because remember, Louis the 14th has got colonies, he's trying to trade. He wants to take down the Dutch, so he invades the Dutch. In 1672, the Dutch called that year Rampjaar. Which meant disaster year, which I think we could call, could 2020 be a Rampjaar by that standard? I mean, you think about the Dutch, even though Louis did not defeat the Dutch were able to defend their country. Part of the reason because they basically flooded a good portion of the country in order to keep Louis from being able to advance. But Rampjaar, a disaster year. And the Dutch were not defeated, but they were defeated financially. Like basically they were such a small, such a small group, even today, only 17 million people. And so with that, when we look at the Dutch, they were, having a hard time against Louis XIV. And so Louis was, really the biggest threat to the balance of power while he was the king of France. Remember that the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, right before Louis became king, that set France on a course to become the preeminent power of Europe, which they remained so for quite a while. You see another French threat to the balance of power with Napoleon. Now, Louis XIV's most important war was his last, which was the War of the Spanish Succession. Basically, Charles II of Spain, not Charles II of England, who had lots of children, just none with his wife. Charles II of Spain wasn't able to have children. That's the guy that I've described before. If you watch that video, is inbred level 5. Okay, like basically Charles, was just a product of this. Of such massive inbreeding that he wasn't able to produce a child. And so in Charles II's will, he willed his throne to one of Louis's relatives, one of Louis XIV's relatives, that we're going to put this person on the throne. And so the coalition was like, no. I mean, when you think, so like Britain and Austria and Prussia, they're just like, no, we're not going to allow this. Okay, we're not going to allow a Bourbon monarch in Spain as well. Remember that before the War of the Spanish Succession, the wars tended to be dynastic. So when you think about when we think about in the 30 Years' War, why did France join, the Protestants, even though they were Catholic? They did so because they wanted to weaken the Habsburgs. Okay, they wanted to weaken the Habsburgs when they were looking there, and so they went in with the Protestants. That's politique. That is judging things based on what's best for your country rather than what's best for your country's religion. And so, when we look at the War of the Spanish Succession, it's the last of the dynastic wars, where we're thinking about this is to increase the power of the Bourbon monarchy or not to increase it. And so what happens is Louis very impressively was able to fight the great powers to a draw. And so they made the peace of the Treaty of Utrecht, which, if you're saying it in Dutch, Utrecht. Okay, but Utrecht is fine. It's a type test, right? So you can just say Utrecht or type Utrecht. And so as far as that goes, that Utrecht basically said that there will be a Bourbon monarch in Spain, but those monarchies cannot get, cannot be combined. So basically they have to be two separate Bourbon dynasties. And so they can't be combined. There is still a Bourbon monarch in Spain today. Actually, there's still a Bourbon monarch in Spain today. So we want to keep that in mind. Still a Bourbon monarch in Spain. So from there, you see that the British, they're thinking about the next phase of warfare. Okay. And actually, I've got something in my Google Docs. Let me just go into here. I've got something in my Google Docs that I think is going to be helpful, perhaps. Let me just note here, warfare in European. Yes, let's see. Let's see. Google Docs is so tough sometimes. European, so history of European warfare. Let's see. I can't. Okay, so yeah, I actually cannot find this document. But I went through that at some point, and I really can't. Let's see. So let me just run in here and see what I've got here. Okay, so periods of, now this is actually, this may actually be kind of helpful to y'all, that I've got something here about periods of European history and kind of some things that are getting along there. I'm going to show off this document. I'll put it in the Crowdcast chat and I'll put it in the YouTube video description. Okay, so this document that I'm about to show off, which you are welcome to download, you're welcome to keep this as notes. So I'm going to go ahead and put this at the bottom of what we've got there. And so we're going to look here at, periods of European history. And this may be something that might be helpful for you to print out and have on hand while you're taking the exam. So I just added that, periods of European history. So in the YouTube description, we've got now periods of European history, and we've also got a link to my new Age of Exploration DBQ. So, when we're looking at this, I'm going to go ahead and put this on screen so that we can look at it together. So somebody was actually asking for a general overview, but what we want to understand, let me wrap up the War of the Spanish Succession. While Louis is concerned about dynasties, the old way of doing warfare, then the British are concerned about getting Gibraltar. The British get Gibraltar, which is in southern Spain near the Strait of Gibraltar, and the British are already thinking about the global balance of power. And that's really going to kind of lead in the next big war after the War of the Spanish Succession is the 7 Years' War, which the only thing you really need to understand about the 7 Years' War, while it was fought in Europe as well, Frederick the Great fought a war against Austria at this time, it was really more of a colonial war. The 7 Years' War, which in United States history is called the French and Indian War, this was a war that had battlefronts from not only in Europe, but in North America, also in India. And so this was a war where the British are, consolidating their status as the global balance of power. Okay, you need access. Okay, I will go ahead. So it looks like, yeah, Google Documents just did some things that they are, really getting very private. Anyone with the link. Okay, so anyone with the link can view now. Okay, access granted, permission updated. Okay, so permission has been updated. So the historical periods. Okay, so note that Louis is thinking backwards at dynastic warfare, and then the British are looking at, what we want to be a world power. And so they get a naval base on Gibraltar, which they still have today. So one thing that I've done here is I basically kind of, divided this into several periods here as we're going into, as we're going forward. Now, for some reason, I stopped at 1848. I can keep going, okay? So basically 1450 to 1600 that you are getting into Renaissance art, the Age of Exploration, the new monarchies, the Reformation, the wars of religion, and the scientific revolution are beginning, okay? So we want to note here kind of what's beginning, what's going on at the same time, noting that Galileo is a product, okay? So as far as that goes, that it is, the scientific revolution is a product of the Renaissance, because remember, the scientific revolution, like the Renaissance, was spurred on by the printing press. Okay, so it's spurred on by the printing press because Copernicus, a dead guy in Poland, is able to communicate with Galileo, a live guy in in Italy. because of the printing press. And so, and when Galileo is tried by the Roman Inquisition, this is something that is happening this is something that's happening in Renaissance Italy, that, Galileo is on trial for being a heretic. Now, we see here the Reformation and the wars of religion are continuing. 1600 to 1648, we start to see the rise of Baroque art and architecture, where we're associating that with the Counter-Reformation. Early absolutism, Stuart absolutism, and we're getting kind of into the peak of the scientific revolution. And we're ending the Reformation era with the Peace of Westphalia. So understand that the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, okay, that is one of our anchor years. So our anchor years are 1648 and 1815. These are end of an era kind of years, okay? So then we see that absolutism is going to reach its peak after the 30 Years' War. So we're going to see the age of absolutism. Now, the new monarchies we saw earlier during this time of the Renaissance and the age of exploration. What you want to remember about the new monarchies is they exercised control over religion. Ferdinand and Isabella exercised control over religion in Spain, and then sorry, I'm not going to share this bigger now. I wasn't sharing quite as big as I needed to. All right, so, where Ferdinand and Isabella said that everybody in Spain is going to be Catholic. Muslims, Jews, you can convert, leave, or die. And then Henry VIII, when he decides to proclaim the Church of England, he gets Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, that is determined here, this principle that we also see in the Peace of Augsburg, whoever reigns his religion. We see here where the monarch is choosing the religion of the people. That's part of the new monarchies. And so then, Henry dies, his son Edward, is Protestant. Then Mary takes over for a little bit. She's Catholic. And then Elizabeth I puts England firmly into Protestant territory, but kind of like the Diet Coke of Protestant, where the Elizabethan religious settlement, what it does is it says that England's going to be Protestant, but the Church of England is going to continue to have, the Church of England is going to continue to have a lot of Catholic elements. She saw this as a compromise because there were a lot of people in England at the time who were still sympathetic to Catholicism. Of course, the religious uniformity created by it during the Tudors and, really solidified by the Elizabethan settlement, this is going to come to a head in the next century and lead to the English Civil War. One of the two things, absolutism and, the fights between the king and parliament over power of parliament, and then also Protestantism. Basically, is the Church of England going to be the only acceptable way to worship, or are other people going to have religious toleration as well? And so as we go through here, we see the Glorious Revolution, the wars of Louis XIV, wars of Peter the Great. Remember, Peter's trying to get these warm water ports. We see the Scientific Revolution concluding and the Enlightenment beginning. Remember the Glorious Revolution DBQ, where it asks, evaluate whether or not the Glorious Revolution could be considered part of the Enlightenment. This is one of those things. There are certainly some things about the Enlightenment that are being foreshadowed there. But at the same time, it is, that there are a lot of things that are also kind of leftovers of the Reformation. The Glorious Revolution is like the last chapter of the Reformation and the first chapter of the Enlightenment, depending on how you see it. Remember that the DBQ, and as Ms. Kinder was saying, that the DBQ really does a lot in your favor, because a lot of it is about interpreting documents, and not so much, even if you don't know a lot about the topic, which hopefully you will, that interpreting the documents is something that you should, you're doing the work of the historian, and every time you've done a DBQ, you've practiced for today's DBQ, no matter what the topic is. So just remember not to panic if it's not a good topic, or what you would consider a good topic. You probably know more than you think if you allow yourself to be calm and not panic. And so with that, we've got the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, and then 1715 to 1789. This is really kind of the peak of the Enlightenment. This is the time between like the death of Louis XIV and the French Revolution. This is the peak of the Enlightenment, a population explosion, the time of enlightened absolutism, also the time of the 7 Years' War. Okay. Now, also, we would note that's, you've got the American Revolution as well, but I'm just going to call it the 7 Years' War. You know what? What I'm going to do here is think about, we'll put both of these. Both of these wars are colonial wars that are affecting the global balance of power. Okay, so that's something that we want to note there, that these are colonial wars affecting the global balance of power. Of course, 1789 to 1815 is the French Revolution, the rise of nationalism and liberalism. Now, note this is ideological, so basically we see here that, ideological warfare, stability warfare, okay? So this is the sort of thing that we're fighting against ideology. We're fighting warfare for, stability, okay? So war, basically military force deployed, military conflicts based on ideologies, okay? So when we think about liberalism, nationalism, etc., and basically and stability. Okay, so stability, conservatism. Okay, so we see here, and then the revolutions of 1840. I don't know why I said 1815. Let's go. Hopefully, none of y'all printed that yet. And balance of power warfare continued. Okay, and then of course we. Oh wait, that's 17. Oh, never mind. So let's see what so basically we've got, okay, sorry. It's a little bit early, isn't it? My tea's still kind of kicking in. Okay, so basically let's just kind of think about this ideological warfare and stability warfare. We're thinking about that. So then we're going to note here that, this is, let's see. So we've got, I'm going to note that balance of power warfare continued. So 1815 to 1848, the Congress of Vienna, and of course we're fighting things for, wars for stability, and of course balance of power warfare at the same time. Now, what we're going to note here is the concert system. Okay, so the concert system, is where basically elites, so basically we look at here, conservative elites, helped each other put down revolutions, okay, or limit their impact, okay, like you see in Greece. Basically, the great powers get together, Greece becomes an independent country, but it's highly negotiated. They have to accept a monarch. Keep in mind that Italy and Germany both united under a monarch as well, not on the basis of full liberalism. Italy did not become a republic like Mazzini and Garibaldi wanted to see. So we see the concert system put down revolutions and did not fight wars. Okay, so wars against each other. Okay, at this time. Okay, so when we note that, we can get into this idea of keeping stability, the concert system, this kind of conservative order at this time. Now, of course, the revolutions of 1848, we need to note that that was basically the end of the age of Metternich. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, we're looking at this is the French Revolution. French Revolution, Napoleon, and then we see here that 1815 to 1848, we're looking at the age of Metternich. Okay, so the age of Metternich, or otherwise known as the conservative order. Okay, so just noting some things that are going on here, and of course this is the the Enlightenment. Okay, so the age of Enlightenment. Okay, and then of course, this here we would note the age of absolutism, and then of course this is the era of the the era of religious wars. Okay, so this is where we're looking at the era of religious wars. And then of course 1450 to 1600, Renaissance and Reformation. And so then, we go from the conservative order to more of an age of nationalism. Okay. And so, so we'll note here, balance of power, and we'll note here that balance of power / stability warfare. Okay, so we're going to try to make this as brief as we can here because I want to try to fit this all on one page. And so 1848 to 1914. Okay, now, of course, one thing we want to note here as well is we see here in this time, we're also going to see the Industrial Revolution beginning. Okay, so this is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is happening in the 1760s. Okay, and of course, partly because of the Age of Enlightenment, people are getting more interested in reason and science, and so education is starting to trend that way as well. Okay, and so then, of course, we see that we see the Industrial Revolution is maturing. Basically, we see that Britain is becoming an industrial power. So Industrial Revolution, maturing in Britain. Okay, and then so when we think about this, now I'm going to decrease this font size just a little bit. Oh, and I can actually make a little room up here. All right, so we're going to note AP Euro. Okay, so let me just make this a little bit smaller here so that we can fit everything on one page. Okay, so I'm going to try to make a little something that can be on one page. And of course, the Crimean War. Okay, so the Crimean War, which is, I would put 1850s, but why not just put something specific there? Okay, so note that the Crimean War is basically, this is the end of the concert system. So 1853 to 1856, okay? And I would put here, I would call this the age of nationalism, okay? So the Crimean War, which is happening 1853 to 1856, ends the concert, so the concert system, because basically we have that is a war, okay? So that is a war that's happening at this time. So ends the concert system, and then this is the time where you've got German and Italian unification, and this is through warfare. Okay, so we see nationalistic warfare, and so that's something. Now also we would note here the Second Industrial Revolution, okay, which is important. I've got a video on that, of course, a handy chart. Remember, the Second Industrial Revolution picks up after 1850, where you see the Bessemer process, where they can mass produce steel, and so you see the high tide of railroads. Also, you see the internal combustion engine, which is the same engine we've got in our cars today. So the Second Industrial Revolution is going on at this time. The new imperialism. Okay, so all of these things, that you want to think about, these are all happening together. Okay, so German and Italian unification happening at that time as well. And so so going from there, we also might want to note a few art movements. Okay, so you can think about Impressionism is happening during this time. Now, of course, at the same time, we think about the age of enlightenment. We're getting into neoclassicism. Okay, so neoclassicism is something that is maturing at that time. Okay, so we've got a few things here we'll note, and I think that I've got everything basically on one page. Okay, so everything's basically on one page. So that's something that if you find that helpful, hopefully that's something that'll help you on your exam. Okay, so as far as that goes, one ring to find them. Yeah, so when we talk about should I Google during the exam, I've talked before, a lot of y'all haven't seen Lord of the Rings, but a lot of y'all haven't seen Lord of the Rings, but at the same time, we want to kind of think about the ring is evil. Frodo's trying to destroy the ring. The ring is evil. Every once in a while, when Frodo's in trouble, he puts on the ring. But when he's not in trouble anymore, then you need to, you need to take that off. Okay. So shout out to Mr. Fridland and Mr. Erde. So here's the thing, don't Google something that's going to be and really probably the best time to use Google is at the end to fact check if you've got some extra time left. But something like this, make sure you ask questions with one-word answers. Okay. So who discovered moons around other planets? Okay, so who discovered moons around other planets? Galileo. Okay, that was the guy. Take the ring off. Make sure that you've got that one word answer. Okay, so who was who put out was the founder, was the father of humanism. Okay, so there are some things that'll come up and you're like, okay, that was Petrarch. All right, so if you've got something like that, that could be efficient, but you certainly don't want to be like reading stuff. Okay, you don't want to be reading stuff during the exam. And really something to kind of note here is that I think is really important is that sometimes if you rely on notes, okay, so if you rely too much on notes, then you're going to find that your brain's not working as well. So Sophia Nichols, if she is, if she is taking the exam, thanks for the recent Instagram follow, and if she's taking the exam and she doesn't use notes, it's probably going to work out better. I mean, you really should think about, anything with notes as like an emergency thing, because I have had some situations where, like for example, I wrote a song about Napoleon recently, last month. And if I've got my lyrics in front of me, I depend on them. Okay. I'm not quite comfortable with it enough to where I can play it second nature. I've practiced it enough. I've been too busy, getting ready for AP exams. But the thing is, if I don't have, words in front of me, if I'm not relying on notes, my brain's working more. One thing that you want to note here is that, this is something, yes, Lauren, you will pass. So we want to note here that, when you don't have something in front of you and you use your brain's going to be more active, and you'll find that your first impulse may be to Google, but if you give your brain a second, you're going to find deeper information there. So when it comes down to it, if you can produce on your own 2 pieces of outside evidence, you think about the natural contextualization. So for example, a conservative order DBQ, Napoleon is going to be the French Revolution. Napoleon will be the natural contextualization. You've got that in your head. Come up with a couple pieces of outside evidence. The thing that we want to note here is that when we're thinking about this, we want to really focus on using our own brains. The more original you are, the best thing you could do is just restrict yourself to like not using notes at all. Now, at the same time, this is really kind of a personal thing here, okay? But if you are in a position where you're like, I've got contextualization here, I've been studying, I'm ready, you're going to produce a better quality essay. Those of you who are trying to get 5s, you're going to produce a better quality, product if you're not looking at notes. Okay, so the thing is, I've actually realized that I have the Fashoda incident. You don't necessarily have to know about that. That's a piece of illustrative evidence. Okay, the thing is, it's more about what you know in general. Nobody's going to ask you, Alina, a multiple choice question asking about your knowledge of the Fashoda incident. Nobody's going to be asking you that question. So keep that in mind. And so when we think about this, so the Fashoda incident was basically a conflict between Britain and France over Egypt. Britain won out and embarrassed France. Okay, so that's something. But with that, you don't necessarily have to know a lot about that. But when it comes down to it, like I said, the song that I wrote about Napoleon, I do a lot better when I am not looking at lyrics, because I'm relying on my own head and I'm building those connections in my brain. Now, if looking at notes helps you do better, like for example, this sheet that I just gave y'all on Google Docs, having something like that printed out may not be a bad idea to reference, but understand that this is a timed test. So time that you spend looking at references, I would be very careful. Like I would make sure that you've got like, I'm going to give myself 3 minutes to look at notes, and I'm going to have a timer. Like I'm going to have a timer on Google going for 3 minutes. And, then I'm not looking at anything. Okay. Then I'm working on my essay. I would be very, 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 very cautious about that. The physiocrats, laissez-faire advocates who were into agriculture. All right. So as far as that goes, let me just. 1812, and the French emperor said that Russia couldn't trade with the British anymore. With a military genius leading 500,000 men, the Grand Army can't do anything but win. Napoleon, the French Revolution brought you to your throne. The continental system, trade with Britain must cease. It's the only way Europe will ever know peace. Will we ever know peace? All right, so with that, I just talked about the continental system. Okay, that was Napoleon's system for trying to exclude, to isolate Britain economically. What it couldn't do against Britain militarily, is doing economically. So basically, Napoleon, after the defeats of Napoleon's navy by Admiral Lord Nelson at the Battle of the Nile and Battle of Trafalgar, Napoleon could not invade Britain. So he tries to isolate them economically by saying that Europe, the continent, isn't going to trade with Britain. So that's the continental system. Okay, so with that, we see here that Napoleon invades Russia. The invasion of Russia was a response to Russia trading with Britain. One thing to understand: Napoleon wasn't trying to conquer Russia. That would have been stupid. Looking back, the invasion was stupid. But when you think about it, Napoleon figured when he showed up with an army of 500,000 men, once he crossed into Russian territory, he thought that the Russian Tsar was going to want to talk about terms for peace. And so Napoleon was really just, it was, from what I'm gathering about it, was more of a scare tactic than anything else. But then the Russians are like, no, we're not negotiating for peace. We're just going to let your army, we're going to fight you a couple battle or two, and we're just going to let your army fall apart out here. So looking at the questions here, okay, so going from there, we see that, we've had something going here. Now, Vicky, that's going to be the 30 Years' War, is something that, was really more religious at first, okay, and becomes more political. One thing we want to note is that the 30 Years' War was the subject of a DBQ, like, 2 years ago. Okay, so it was the subject of the DBQ 2 years ago. I don't think we're going to see another thing happening there. Okay, so as far as that goes, I don't see that being the DBQ topic. And so with that, can I go over tips and strategies to maintain time? Francis, Kennedy, and Arabella say hi. Shout out to Mr. Muovich's class. And so one of the things to save time, like I've said before, that most of you, if you've think about what you've done in the past when you've done DBQs. If you typically find a document or two to be confusing, just when a document's confusing, own that, strike it. Look at the documents that you're going to find most helpful. Now, also remember that if it's a longer document, if you read part of it and you can understand what's going on, it's going to be very rare that there's going to be a plot twist. Very rare that there's going to be a plot twist and all of a sudden, like, where, oh, the document just took a totally different direction. So once you understand what is going on, I think that that's something that you might want to, hey, I understand what's going on. I know how I would use this to support my argument. So there we go. And so, for example, okay, so when we look at my DBQ on enlightened absolutism, so find, basically you're not summarizing the whole document, but you're going through this document and you are, you're going through these documents and you are deciding in terms of, how am I going to use this? Okay. So the other thing, last night in the fireside chat session, I was playing a scene. We were talking about a scene from Talladega Nights, where Ricky Bobby, Will Ferrell's character, is saying the blessing. He's saying grace. And notice, like he says, dear Lord, baby Jesus. And, they say, why is, he's not just a baby. He's like, I want to see him as a baby. A lot of these documents are flexible. You can make those documents argue the way that you want. So, Ricky Bobby wants to see baby Jesus as a baby, and there's no problem with that. Whereas somebody might want to see him with a beard, or as John C. Reilly's character is, like, I see him in a tuxedo T-shirt that he's dressed up, but he likes to party. So however you want to see these documents. So for example, with a visual source here, when we're looking at Frederick the Great of Prussia, okay, so there's a painting of Frederick the Great of Prussia. The prompt here is, were absolutists more enlightened or more absolutist? Okay, and so we have to think about this. Now this, here's the thing. You can see whatever you want to see here. Now, most people are going to look at this document and they're going to see absolutism because it's warfare. We see these dead bodies. That doesn't look very enlightened. But here's the thing. If I want to see Jesus as a baby, I've gone in there and these are argumentative. So this is part of the fun of it, that if I want to see Frederick the Great as enlightened, then what I do here is I'm like, wait, They might be at war, but look at Frederick the Great walking on foot at the front of his troops, leading them into battle, carrying a flag like a common soldier. And so we see here that we could also see this as a personification of Frederick as the first servant of the state. So this is something, and then we can go into, Frederick's advocacy of the potato as a scientific crop. We can talk about his reforms of the civil service, but we can see, if we want to say, look, I think Frederick was enlightened. We note here an example of Frederick as the first servant of the state, is walking at the head of his troops in the battle without a horse, carrying a flag, and doing the work of a common soldier and leading by example. So you can make this document to an extent. Now, some documents aren't going to be flexible, but some are. So when you look here, and a lot of these documents are put in there here specifically to go both ways. So what we want to note here is, here's the French ambassador talking about Catherine II. This princess seems to combine every kind of ambition in her person. Well, right there, I'm seeing absolutism. He's calling her ambitious. Okay. Now, we could conceivably use this document for that, but we'll read a little bit more than that. I'd say you want to read more than one sentence. Everything that may add luster to her reign will have some attraction for her. Science and the arts will be encouraged to flourish in the empire. Projects useful for domestic economy will be undertaken. She will endeavor to reform administration and justice to invigorate the laws. Now, we could take this and we could say, this is evidence of, if I want to see Catherine the Great as enlightened, this is evidence of enlightenment. We see here that there's the French ambassador who's saying, look, I'm sizing up Catherine and I'm thinking that she's enlightened. Now, here's the thing, or we can start going here that her policies will be based on Machiavellianism. Then we see here comparing her to the King of Prussia, comparing to Frederick. Haughty as she is, she will stubbornly pursue her undertakings and will rarely retrace a false step. Cunning and falsity appear to be vices in her character. Woe to him who puts too much trust in her. Love affairs may become a stumbling block to her ambition and prove fatal for her peace of mind. This passionate princess, which we definitely, passion is not enlightened, right? Still held in check by fear and consciousness of internal troubles, will know no restraint once she believes herself firmly established. So if I want to do absolutism, I've got that. But if I were looking for something for enlightenment, I've already got it. And I don't necessarily have to try to understand every little word of the document. Sometimes you'll find a phrase confusing. Don't sit there, try to figure out that confusing phrase. Go into the document, get what you're going to get out of it, and go. All right, that's what we're going to do here. So with that, now also we could say here we've got a very rich potential point of view, and point of view analysis is very helpful in situations like this. He's describing a woman who's going to become a ruler. And I think somebody could argue, persuasively, that perhaps this person, since he's from France, where a woman could not reign as queen, that the idea of a woman reigning is alien to him, and he's skeptical about a woman in power in the first place. And so that's something where, we see here that we could do that French POV and say that these may be traits that she has that were common for men at the time, but he may be judging her harshly because he sees those same traits in a woman. That would be valid. So you want to make sure to find the documents that are most clear and most argumentative. And also, once you find something you can use, make a note of that, and you've supported the argument with the document. Historians do that all the time. They're not trying to paint the whole picture. They're trying to make an argument. If you find this document, in my experience, a lot of people didn't use this document. They found it to be a little confusing. And if you do, go ahead and strike it. Make sure, it's better to use 3 documents and use them well than to use 5 documents and be sloppy. On this DBQ, most people use, if they were doing the 3 document strategy, 1, 2, and for. And these all, like, one thing I like about this DBQ is all of the documents are flexible. Okay, so remember Ricky Bobby saying the grace, and he's saying the grace to Lord baby Jesus. He wants to see Jesus as a baby. You get to see these documents however you want, as long as your interpretation of the document is defensible. Okay, as long as it's defensible. All right, people in the YouTube chat, press an F to pay respects over there. Hopefully not for your AP scores, right? Hopefully F to pay respects to your exam after you destroy it. So those are some things. Now, also what we're going to note here, Arabella, is, like I said, my advice to do your contextualization last. And that way, I mean, contextualization for a lot of people is not quick. They do a lot of thinking during it. And that's why I say go get that, write your thesis. Look at your thesis. Make sure it's argumentative. Make sure it includes a line of reasoning. Preferably, it has 2 points that are being previewed, one for the first paragraph, one for the second paragraph. And so when we go over this, make sure that you're doing that. And then that way, contextualization can be seen as kind of icing on the cake or a bonus. All right. So going from there. And so the effects of the scientific revolution, Miss Roberson's AP Euro class. The effects of the scientific revolution, one of the main effects of the scientific revolution is it's altering how people are, how people are viewing knowledge. Okay, so before the scientific revolution, most knowledge came from traditional and religious sources. Now, keep in mind that it was not just the church. Okay, it was not just the church that did this. It was, it was not just the church. It was, let's see, it was also the ancient authorities. So when we think about this, Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy, Ptolemy, it's a type test, right? So when we look here, ancient authorities, what we want to note here is when we look at ancient authorities of the scientific revolution, I'm going to share my screen a little bit so you can see the chart here, that basically what people knew, or what they thought they knew, what they considered to be scientific truth, it came from, the scriptures perhaps, or it came from these ancient authorities. So it wasn't just about the church. You look at Aristotle, who was an expert on physics, astronomy, and logic. Now, Aristotle's logic is still very relevant today. We still use deductive reasoning. We combine it with inductive reasoning, but we still use it. Galileo, in his Leaning Tower of Pisa experiments, he, dropped a cannonball and a musket ball. And he disproved what Aristotle had previously said, that, heavy objects fall faster than light objects. So, Galileo said, nope, it has no, everything falls at the same rate if we drop two things that are the same, made of the same substance and of the same shape. So at the Leaning Tower of Pisa, Galileo disproved Aristotle. Now, Galileo also, with his telescope, he's able to see like craters on the moon. Aristotle had said that craters on the moon, Aristotle had said the moon's made of like a spiritual substance. And Galileo's like, nope, the moon is basically a rock. It has craters, it has blemishes. And so same with sunspots. When people saw sunspots, it's like, the sun is even made of something that is physical. And so then Galileo, also, Copernicus and Galileo, they disproved Ptolemy's astronomy, his geocentric model. So Copernicus and Galileo together, now they never knew each other, but Copernicus published his work posthumously, Galileo proved it, and together they established heliocentric theory. Now, people tend to forget Galen. For those of you who watch Star Wars, in Rogue One, there's Galen Erso, who is the scientist who designed the Death Star. And so Galen was a doctor and an anatomist. So the humoral theory of disease, basically, if you're sick, your humors are messed up. Galen did not use human dissection. Vesalius used human dissection. And then William Harvey, who was, who wrote about circulation. Go ahead and feel free to take a screenshot of this. I'm not going to share it right now, but go ahead and take a screenshot if you want, if it's something you think that would help you. So with this, William Harvey, now this is something to think about here, is that today, the number one killer in the United States every year is heart disease. So when we look at heart disease as the number one killer, William Harvey, wrote about circulation. So when we think about this, you know, heart disease impacts your circulation. So William Harvey's work on circulation is still something that is relevant today. So what you see here is that there were a lot of people before the scientific revolution, they were looking at traditional sources of authority, whereas the scientific revolution gets us more based on, now we still look at traditional sources, but traditional sources we see, you know, we think about today when we're thinking about truth, empiricism and rationalism. Now this carries on to the Enlightenment. Empiricism, I observe it, I see it, I touch it, I smell it, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, I've observed it with the senses, empiricism. Now that is Sir Francis Bacon and John Locke were empiricists. Rationalism, it needs to make sense. That's Descartes. Okay, Descartes using his inductive reasoning. I think, therefore I am. You know, Descartes trying to wonder, do I exist? How can I prove that I exist? Descartes says you got to doubt everything. And that's the thing that we start to see, a scientific process that is based on skepticism. Aristotle said this, you know what? Let's see if we can prove it. And that is how this changes scientific thinking. So rationalism, it makes sense. You know, when Descartes tried to figure out, do I exist? And he comes to the conclusion, well, I do exist, because what thinks must exist. I am thinking, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Cogito, ergo sum. All right. So there's somebody with a curse word name. Oh my goodness, I don't know if I'll be able to find this this individual, but we'll see if there is if there's something. Yeah, so we'll see what we can do here. Let's see. Oh, that's oh, okay, yeah. So we'll go ahead and kick that person out of the Crowdcast chat. Okay, so got that. Okay, so we've got that. We kicked somebody. Great. Okay. So going from there, let's go ahead and you know, take. So we've got that. Thanks, James, for that question. And you know, we'll note here that you know, let's see. French Revolution timeline, importance, aftermath. Okay, so Lauren, let's focus on the phases of the French Revolution. Okay, so the French Revolution goes from the liberal phase about 1789 to 1791. Okay, so let's go ahead and just throw a few things up here. I'm going to go into the what we call the radicalization of the French Revolution. And so going from one phase to another. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see, French Revolution, Napoleon, and yeah, where I've got here, and I've got, you know, of course, it's probably kind of late for watching lectures at this point, but let's go ahead and go into the phases, the general timeline of the French Revolution. Okay, the general timeline of the French Revolution. And so going from there, let's go ahead and let's see. So French Revolution, yeah, so let's open that up. Okay, so the radicalization of the French Revolution. First of all, we look at the phases. So from about 1789 to 1791. Remember, the French Revolution, the whole thing's going from 1789 to 1815. Feel free to take a screenshot or something like that, you know, if you want to have something like this handy, or write it down. When we're looking at the phases, the liberal phase, okay, of the revolution, that's where we've got the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, the decrees of August 4th, the civil constitution of the clergy, which is not liberal, but it has nationalist elements, and it is a step toward liberalism, perhaps, because the church is no longer, you know, controlling the state. But, you know, that's something that we don't see full liberalism here, but we see liberalism, and we see the goal being a constitutional monarchy. 1792 to 94, we see this radical phase where you have the French Republic. Okay, so that's happening at that time, 1792 to 94. The French Republic, the Reign of Terror, this radical phase of the revolution. Note that even though that's the most visible phase, it's comparatively short. Followed by the Directory phase, which is the least important for purposes of the AP Euro exam. You are not likely to get, you know, something about the Directory, okay? And so, but the Directory, you just want to note that they're keeping the forms of the Reign of Terror, but things have kind of calmed down. It's sort of a transition. It's a weak kind of government. which is part of the reason why Napoleon overthrows it in 1799. So 1799 to 1815, you've got the Napoleonic phase. And remember that one of the biggest questions about Napoleon is, was he faithful to the ideals of the French Revolution, or did he betray them? That is an argumentative question that we often see from, from historians. And so that's really up to you. Now, looking at the liberal phase, okay, so let's take a look at the liberal phase of the revolution. We see, a phase that's inspired by Locke and Montesquieu. Whereas the radical phase, we see that that's going toward Rousseau. So the liberal phase, the bourgeoisie are really in charge of this revolution. They're looking for constitutional monarchy, liberal reform, the abolition of privilege. When we think about these influencers, Locke and Montesquieu, and the National Assembly and the Legislative Assembly are your governing bodies here. Now, the National Assembly would be the main one that I would note for purposes of this exam if the prompt has to deal with the French Revolution. It was the National Assembly that released the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen and the decrees of August 4th, which abolished the privileges of nobility, so-called feudalism. Then the radical phase, we start to see the Jacobins. Now, the Jacobins, these are people who favored a French republic, okay? They favored a French republic, and also the sans-culottes. Now, the sans-culottes, these were people from the urban working class. So we see that the crowd is taking over here. This is largely a Parisian kind of thing that's happening here, that the urban working classes are becoming involved. Now, we don't see here the same kind of liberal goals here that we see egalitarianism. Now, liberalism, classical liberalism, is about liberty and equality, but we want to understand what liberalism means in terms of equality. It's equality under the law. Okay, so the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen says that all men are born free and remain equal in rights. Okay, not necessarily equal economically in terms of education or equal in any other way, but are equal in rights, that everyone has the same rights. That's what a liberal focuses on. But what we're seeing here during the radical phase is we want everyone to be equal in every way. That's where, a lot of the nobles are starting to leave, or, they end up getting guillotined for being an aristocrat. And so you see here, very nationalistic. Also note republicanism. This is when Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, where they are decapitated by the guillotine, which, remember, the guillotine is an instrument of the Enlightenment because it is a quick and painless death. It is not a torturous execution. So we want to understand the Enlightenment as one of the the influencing factors of the French Revolution. Now, we could think about, the financial crisis, the monarchy, which was certainly part of this, but also the, when we think about the Enlightenment ideas. And so when we're looking here, we see Rousseau, this idea of the general will. This is the age of Robespierre and the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety. Now, when we're talking about the Napoleonic phase, it's important. What I think about when I'm thinking about Napoleon are the 3 C's. Okay, so the 3 C's are the Concordat, the Napoleonic Code, and the Continental System. Okay, I would say, yeah, the Vendée is something that interests me more than anything. But one of these days I'll make a video about the Vendéans. But this is probably not the best time to talk about the Vendéans. All right, so we will see what happens here. Okay, so this all right. What's going as far as this goes? Okay, remember, now the thing is, I can't really moderate the chat and and teach, so it's a little bit there are some people that we will try to do something about, but keep in mind that we are going to let's see, so what have we got here? Okay, so we've got there, but anyway, we've just got to, y'all just navigate around that because I'm trying to teach. I can't really moderate and teach, so sorry about that. Now, so from there, with the Napoleonic phase, the Concordat, the Code, and the Concordat, the Code, and the Continental System. The Concordat with the Catholic Church, and we're talking about secularism. Okay, the Concordat of the Concordat with the Catholic Church is basically saying that the Catholic Church will be brought back into France, that there will be religious freedom for Catholics. The Catholic religion will be considered the majority religion of France. Now, this is a little different than the old regime because this is the majority religion, not the established religion. Okay, so not the state religion, not the only religion people can practice. So Napoleon allows for religious toleration. Okay, so he allows for religious toleration for everyone in France. So that in a way is enlightened. But he also does give the Catholic Church a privileged position. So the Concordat is at once liberal and, is at once liberal and conservative in some ways. Okay. So, oh my goodness, he said something to Hadassah. Oh my Lord, Hadassah is one of my favorites. That is not okay. Which Hadassah actually, I think, got in touch with me on Instagram, and we need to make sure that we get back to her on that. Well, I talk about the Miss Wakefield's class. Okay, so now let's go to the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code, it was a nationalistic endeavor. It gave France a set of laws. France, for the first time, had a set of laws for all of France. Okay, so a set of laws for all of France. So we see here a national law code. It gets rid of all of the previous feudal law codes. And so that's something that is important here in terms of nationalism. Now, it is progressive in some ways, that allowed for divorce in some cases. There was no divorce under the old regime, but the terms for divorce were different for men and women. A man could sue for divorce if his wife was unfaithful to him in any circumstances. A woman could only sue for divorce if the man brought his mistress into the house. So there has been a double standard there. So with that, the English Civil War, okay, that's always something people want to note about here. Now, remember that this trend toward absolutism in the continental system, we've already talked about that, not trading with Britain. Okay, an embargo on trade with Britain from the continent. And the reason for Napoleon's invasion of Russia. So people like to talk about the English Civil War, okay? And so we want to note here that after the death of Elizabeth I, James I of Scotland James VI of Scotland is invited to also be James I of England. James I was a big believer in the divine right of kings. He believed that the king is basically, put there by God. The king is put there by God. And since the king is put there by God, then, the king is supposed to be obeyed. All right, the king is supposed to be obeyed because the king was put there by God. And so that is the whole idea of that is the whole idea here, that the king is put there to be obeyed and is an instrument of God. Therefore, a representative body should not be able to tell the king what to do. The difference between absolutism and constitutionalism, the biggest difference is absolutism, the king can do whatever the king wants by decree, or the queen. And, so then, constitutionalism, there is a representative body that the monarch answers to with clearly defined powers. So James I and Charles I tried to rule absolutely. They also tried to mandate the Anglican religion as religious uniformity. Okay, so religious uniformity in the Anglican religion, which ticked off the Calvinists, the Puritans, and the Separatists, depending on which faction of Calvinists they fit into. But they weren't tolerant in terms of religion, and they didn't want to roll for parliament. Charles I tried to revise the way he collected ship money. Okay, I've always got to say ship money. Make that clear that we're talking about ship money. All right, so that's always going to be something important there, that we make sure that we want to make that distinction. Ship money. All right, so Charles I is collecting ship money, and he says, I can change a tax without consulting Parliament. Parliament's not, no, you can't. And so finally, things come to a head with the people that support Parliament. They're the Roundheads, the people who support Charles I, the Cavaliers, and they fight the English Civil War. The Roundheads win. They execute Charles I and establish what is, for all practical purposes, a military dictatorship under Oliver Cromwell. Parliament still meets, but it's the rump parliament, which is the leftovers. Only the people who are Cromwell's yes men, who wanted to execute Charles I, are allowed to stay in Parliament. So the Puritans were very, well, puritanical. We've still got a word for that, meaning strict. And so they banned, like, cockfighting, like basically, fighting chickens together was a big pastime back then. They didn't have Tiger King back then, so they'd get a couple chickens to fight each other. The Puritans didn't like that. There was often gambling involved with that. Then the 12 days of Christmas. Christmas used to be a big 12-day festival. The Puritans tried to quash that. And so once Cromwell died, they bring in Charles II, Charles I's son. And under Charles II, Charles II doesn't try to rule with the same kind of absolutism. He allows religious toleration. Now, he does assent to the Test Acts, which Parliament was pretty insistent upon, and basically saying that you had to be an Anglican in order to hold public office or a position of public trust, that you had to take communion in the Anglican Church in order to do that. So that's something that is, there's a little bit of continuity, a little bit of change, because the exact relationship between the Crown and Parliament still is undecided, that Charles is still meddling with Parliament when they tried to keep his, so when he tried to keep his, his brother from being excluded from the succession. So James II was a Catholic, and Parliament did not want James to become a Catholic, and they tried to pass a bill that would exclude him from the succession. Charles I sent Parliament home. So James II takes over. He's a Catholic, and he is again having repeated run-ins with Parliament. He's appointing Catholics to high positions of public trust in violation of the Test Acts. So finally, Parliament invites Mary II, who is James II's daughter. He invites James's own daughter to come in and overthrow him, and her husband, William of Orange, who was the stadtholder in the Netherlands. So William and Mary come in, and they sign the English Bill of Rights, which basically is a concession from the monarchy of several powers and the beginning of a true constitutional monarchy in England, complete with toleration, complete with a parliament that is, the legislative authority there. And the king is now, you've got these things that are defined. So constitutionalism was, the English Civil War didn't really settle things, but the Glorious Revolution did. The Glorious Revolution was comparatively bloodless. It wasn't completely bloodless, but it was comparatively bloodless when we compare it, of course, to the English Civil War. So with that, we want to, I think what we've got here, I told y'all that I was going to kind of wrap this up about 12:15, and then I'm heading over to Marco Learning's channel. This is going to give you 45 minutes to go and tackle the Age of Exploration DBQ. If you want to download that Age of Exploration DBQ, then go ahead and do that. If you don't even write the whole thing, at least go through the documents and set it up. Consider printing out that Marco Learning guide that got, on my DBQ page. Remember, the POV Hold It Down guide is something that you might find useful. So that you can just Google POV Hold It Down if you're still, if you still got some questions. And then going into make sure that at 1 o'clock I will be on Marco Learning's YouTube channel. That is going to be the Lunch with Marco. Okay, so we're going to be live with Lunch with Marco on Marco Learning's YouTube channel. So that's going to be at 1 o'clock p.m. and I'm going to give you some time to to work with that Age of Exploration DBQ. I think it would be good for you to at least set up a DBQ today. If you want to write it, that's great, but at least set it up. Okay, so with that, I'm going to be on Marco Learning's channel. And so make sure that we are going to, we're going to be there at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Take yourself a little break. If you don't want to do a DBQ right now, go outside or watch something funny on YouTube. I would say go outside, spend a little bit of time outside. Okay, that would be very important here. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, just go to YouTube and go to Marco Learning. Okay, YouTube, Marco Learning. So yeah, so with that, I'll be on Marco Learning's channel at 1 o'clock. Best of luck to everybody. See y'all in about 40 minutes 40 to 45 minutes for Lunch with Marco. It is always a pleasure.